listening to Centered.
This week, Democrats look to respawn with video game ads, and the Trump administration pauses new international student visa appointments in their war on Harvard. And in the business of entertainment, Hollywood could be looking at a booming $4 billion summer.
Our panel, former Obama White House advisor and former DHS spokesperson Louis Miranda, and former Clinton appointee and former senior Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Carl Meacham.
I'm Louis Miranda. Thank you for tuning in. Over the weekend, New York Times' Shane Goldmacher reported on efforts underway in the Democratic Party to turn things around, including a prospectus for a $20 million effort to regain support among young men. The potential project would study syntax, language, and content that gains virality, in other words, that goes viral, and recommends buying ads in video games. Carl, criticisms are certainly coming in hot. Fox News Digital called it bizarre. You're a father of young men. Do the young men need to be studied?
I don't think, do young men need to be studied? I think a lot of women would say yes. But I would say to you.
You're sounding like David Hogg.
Yeah, I would say to you, my wife would be one. I would say that, being a man is sort of a topic these days. But it's mostly because, a lot of boys feel that being a man or being masculine makes you suspect. And I think
the word is sus.
Yeah, sus. There you go. And I think that's how a lot of young guys feel when they look at today's Democratic Party. Somewhere along the way, Democrats stopped being sort of able to talk to men and started talking about them. And it's often it's been with scorn, right? Masculinity became synonymous with toxicity. And suddenly being a man meant being part of the problem. But not every man, right, is Andrew Tate, right? Most young men, including my three boys, just want to be seen and respected. I have three boys, one who's 21, another one 19, and then a teenager. And you can see, that they're facing struggles. I mean, our boys are lucky, but I think there's a lot of boys who are falling back in school. Men are more likely to die by suicide than women. And they're disproportionately represented as both victims and perpetrators of violent crime. And this is an emergency, I think, as a society, and we're not talking about it. So a lot of folks now are asking, what does it mean to be a man? And that tells you sort of where things are going. Masculinity, at least the way that I learned it, was at its core, is not about aggression or dominance. It's about being reliable. It's about being honest. It's about being able to show the courage to show emotion. And I think popular culture now isn't reflecting these things. And I think, Democrats up to now have been silent. Another, a lot of people would describe them as mocking masculinity, and that only deepens this sense of abandonment. And I think if you look at the numbers, Luis, from 2020 to 2024, the Democratic Party lost 9 points among men aged 18 to 29 and 16 points among Latino men, 10 points among Black men. So I would say, Trump didn't ask men to change, right? He just gave them space. Democrats don't have to imitate that, but they do need to show men that they matter and that they care about them. And, if Democrats want to win men back, they should stop trying to fix them and start listening to them. And this is something that I think is important in this conversation, that they're studying it. I think it's interesting that they're studying it. I think the information is out there, and it's fairly obvious what they need to do.
Interesting that you talked about them wanting to be understood. Fox News Digital's article also cited an MSNBC contributor that called it an anthropological approach, and expressing frustration that people don't want to be decoded. They, quote, want to be understood, also from that contributor. So that's really fascinating, and it speaks to, I'm raising two girls and a boy. The boy is the youngest, the fascinating thing is that I think it's been good for him to have older sisters who keep him in line and teach him to have a broader perspective than he otherwise might. And so there's a positive to that. I think that it's also important that boys be allowed to feel like they're constructive and positive forces in society. And that doesn't mean that we don't question and address the history of how men have behaved that can be toxic. I mean, I don't think we should stop calling out when people are toxic, but I think you're right that you can't start by assuming that all boys are toxic and then making them feel like they are less, because it is going to contribute to that backlash.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be. I mean, we were having conversations with some friends over, and one of my wife's friends, who's an avid hiker, said, "Is it scarier to bump into a bear or to a man on the hike?" And everybody, the women, sort of said that it would be scary to bump into a man. So a lot of some of these concerns are real. I think it has to do with having a conversation and starting from the assumption that they're not all bad. And I think that a lot of men feel that that's sort of the assumption in the Democratic Party going into it, that any expression of masculinity is looked down upon. And I think the conversation is what needs to be had to find sort of the right kind of center and move forward, because it's affecting votes.
Sure. And look, and I think that it is exactly why you're seeing a surge from people like Governor Andrew Cuomo, who is now running for mayor in New York City after being essentially pushed out of the governorship due to very serious accusations against him and caught up in the Me Too movement that a lot of people would still argue was very much sound and reasonable and should have happened. And yet you see him now with a very solid lead in the race for the mayorship in New York City. You have Rahm Emanuel, who offered a very tough assessment of his party in an article in the Wall Street Journal, where he called the Democratic brand toxic and weak and woke. He continues to build speculation that he might run for president. And so you do see that kind of energy coming from Democrats. Of course, you have David Hogg, who we've talked about now in a couple of episodes, also pushing this idea that we need to figure out how to talk to young men. So it's no surprise that the Democratic Party is looking at this. But let me also say that, when you get into a competitive primary, I think Rahm is a very serious, and if he runs, he will be a disciplined and strong candidate. And yet you also look at what are some of the histories of these potential candidates and how are they going to affect you in a primary. Rahm was very involved in the Clinton administration during a period in which the Clinton administration focused on policing. And that was good for reducing crime, but it hasn't aged terribly well when you look at some of the other issues around police violence and during the George Floyd protests, that kind of issue got much more prominent. So someone like a Rahm Emanuel might look great right now. By the way, he was also involved in sort of moving towards treating all illegal immigration as a criminal situation rather than a civil violation in terms of the 1996 law that passed. So he looks good right now in the context of the electoral defeat of 2024. But that doesn't mean that this is going to be easy. And by the way, I think he'd have a strong campaign to run. I'm not criticizing him or dismissing him off the bat, because I do think that his perspective is something that the Democratic Party needs to take very seriously. But it's to say that we're far from resolving what kind of candidate is going to be necessary.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be that simple within the party for him, Luis. I think that these viewpoints, the Rahm Emanuel viewpoint, and he comes from Clinton, right, might not be a dominant viewpoint these days, even though I think that there are efforts within the Democratic Party to move to the center. But I do think, and listening to Bernie Sanders yesterday, he was on Fox. He was talking about the parties, both of them being corrupt, right? You do see different sort of leadership pillars within the Democratic Party, that being one of them, the Rahm Emanuel side being one, the Bernie Sanders side being another, Warren, and you have sort of the progressive side. You have like three, and you would hope that, they kind of meld together at some point, because together they're going to be able to be more effective than separate. And there isn't a lot of time. I mean, there's the midterm coming up. There's these separate races coming up. And if they want to be effective, I think they want to move away from this contemplative or this inside war that's happening and come out with something very clear and attractive.
I wouldn't call it a war, though.
All right, what is it?
I think it's a necessary re-examining of like, who do we want to be and how are we going to present ourselves, and that's important because the party does need to shift in terms of what it focuses on, in terms of cultural areas that have become much more polarizing, and the party needs to figure that out. But when you look at what a David Hogg is trying to do versus what a Rahm is trying to do, I think there's significant difference. Hogg is calling to primary people that he considers ineffective, and in many ways that could harken back to the type of leadership that Rahm is proposing, that would take a much more traditional and centrist approach than what perhaps a more progressive David Hogg era, even though he's also calling to understand young men in a different way. So there's a bit of an interesting dynamic at play there that I think we still don't quite understand. But they could potentially be at odds with each other. And so you're going to have potentially a Rahm in a strong position in a Democratic primary if he runs. And at the same time, you're going to have the progressive wing with Hogg and others running primary challenges against more centrist or older Democrats. And that's going to be a very fascinating contrast to figure out. Carl, you were at the center of that kind of battle when it played out with the Tea Party challenging the Republican Party, sort of a precursor to what we saw later with the MAGA movement. And so talk to us a little bit about what you went through and what you saw in 2012 when that was emerging, with Senator Lugar being challenged from the right.
Yeah, this was 2012, and this was after the election of Barack Obama, right? Which I think forced, you were talking about a sort of a re-examination of the Democratic Party after Donald Trump was elected. This is what was happening with the Republican Party post Barack Obama being elected, right? So there were reactions that were, again, you're seeing this being played out with Democrats, reactions that were more extreme insofar as being more conservative, and feeling that the Republican Party didn't win because it wasn't conservative enough in dealing with Barack Obama, right? And you had McCain and Palin against Barack Obama, right? And Biden. And what you saw at that point was a movement emerge that was more conservative, right? That was the Tea Party. And you had, and Fox, again, sort of took the banner of that. And we were pretty much, I would say, the target of that period because we were viewed as not being hard enough. And we were viewed, or Senator Lugar was being viewed as, or traditional Republicans were being viewed as part of the problem, right? That they worked across the aisle. That was a negative. That, they were very focused on issues that a lot of folks of the base, right, would define as elitist, right? The issues having to do with foreign affairs. In our case, Senator Lugar was a foreign affairs champion, leader, well regarded in the United States and around the world on issues of nonproliferation with Russia, dating back to the 90s, right? 90s and 80s, right? He was, Ronald Reagan called him his favorite mayor when he was mayor of Indianapolis. And I believe, he had a standing with traditional Republicans that was very strong, and probably the opposite of the Republicanism that the Tea Party wanted, which was more aggressive in the wake of a massive loss with Barack Obama. So we saw that we lost pretty badly. There were commercials in Indiana that actually highlighted Barack Obama saying that his favorite Republican was Dick Lugar. That didn't help us in Indiana at all. And that is sort of reflective of the environment that existed. I do think that the Republicans then went from the Tea Party, and that evolved into what we saw with Donald Trump. The issues, the anti-globalism. Senator Lugar was an internationalist. He was a realist. He was a globalist, believed in working with international organizations, right? There's a response against that. There's a nativist response as well. So there's an isolationist response on the foreign affairs side, and then there's this nativist response, which you see exhibited in the anti-immigration side. So you see sort of this evolution of where the party was, rule of law, internationalist, this is the party that defeated the Russians in the Cold War, right? To this response, which was a much more isolationist and nativist approach that was starting with the Tea Party and then evolved. And I think you're seeing its full-blown strength with Donald Trump.
And it was really fascinating what you said about the fact that people were upset that he would dare reach across party lines.
Right.
To me, that's just so troubling in what's supposed to be a democracy. And look, a democracy functions if the minority has rights. And that means that you have to listen to them and you have to engage with them and you have to find consensus. It doesn't work if either side decides that it's their way or the highway. Yeah. And what I worry about is that I see that kind of reaction now on the left that, well, if you don't agree with us by now on this, then there's just no way to reconcile. And that can't work in a democracy. You have to allow for different points of view. In a liberal democracy, you're going to have to respect other viewpoints, even if you disagree with them. You don't have to respect them in a way that you like them, but you have to respect that someone's entitled to have a different viewpoint. And I think it's very dangerous that both on the right and on the left, we're seeing tendencies that push against that. Because then how do you have a system that works and that protects the rights of the minority? When I say minority, I don't mean in the ethnic or racial sense. I mean the political minority, because a political minority could exist at any time for any reason. And are they going to have any kind of rights in a system dominated by the opposition? And if they don't, then democracy falters and you fall to extremes. And that's incredibly troubling.
Yeah, the whole system was set up to protect the rights of the minority viewpoints, as you've highlighted. We saw this with Mitch McConnell saying that he wasn't going to work with Barack Obama, that he wasn't going to help him be successful, right? And we already started to see, we're seeing some of that with Democrats and Republicans and vice versa, right? So, and that is something that I think has just worsened. Now, what you're seeing is just a complete unwillingness. And there can be areas where you'd work together. I think it's important to have red lines on both sides. And the red lines that both parties should have are, if you're trying to change the rules of the game that we've agreed on, which is the Constitution, which is the rule of law, then everybody should be outraged. This is not an issue of right and left. This is not an issue of Democrat and Republican. This is an issue of, we all believe in the rules of the game. We all believe in democracy.
You're defending institutions and everybody hates institutions.
No, but this is the hard part. I think this is the hard part about where an opposition to Donald Trump is dealing with. You can't say that you want to go back to how things were, because that's just more of the same.
So look, I don't know where Rahm Emanuel stands yet, so I don't want to get out on a limb, and I don't know who I would support in the presidential primary, but I'm excited about a Rahm type of candidacy because we need someone who actually stands up for institutions and says, wait a second, and this is, again, a message to both the far right and the far left. If you want to safeguard the type of systems that have actually enabled America to thrive and for people to have their rights protected and where we can actually make progress, whether something as basic as providing health care like we did during the Obama administration through Obamacare, or the civil rights progress that has been made over the last 4 decades, you need institutions that are built to protect those rights. And I think that someone like a Rahm is the kind of figure that could help make that case, because everyone seems afraid right now. I think there's this sort of reaction that the general population is so frustrated with how things have gone that they no longer believe in the system. They no longer believe in our democracy. They no longer believe in our Constitution. And that's true on the right, which is willing to forego the Constitution for whatever Trump wants. And it's increasingly true on the left, where people want radical change to a degree that the system doesn't allow for quickly. And I think you need someone who says, well, wait a second, the things that you guys actually care about are protected by those very institutions. And so whether it's Trump dismantling government through DOGE in the way that he has, and the way that he's just devastated the federal workforce, or if it's, on the far left, where they're just tired of institutions as they are because of the slow progress, somebody needs to defend it. And if a Rahm does run, I think he would be a strong voice that wouldn't be afraid to stand up for that and say, the institution isn't the problem. It's who you put at the controls.
I think that's a great point, Luis. I also would say that it's important in this reexamination to really dig deep into why did they vote for, why did the electorate who voted for Donald Trump feel the way it did, and find what it is that Democrats offer that is better as a solution to dealing with those problems. I think it's incredibly important in the reexamination, not just to focus on these different, subgroupings, the blacks, the whites, the women, the trans, the LGBTQ. No, the issue is, why did folks feel that voting for Donald Trump was the way out? And then learn from that. I think that's going to be an incredibly important approach. You see Democrats leaning into this center. Okay, I think Rahm Emanuel comes from a Democratic school that is more centrist, and I think that for the things that you're saying, I think he may be more appealing, but he's also tough as nails. So politically, he's probably also ready. And probably this is his time to deal with the kind of political combat that we're seeing being waged by Republicans right now, which currently the Democratic Party is not winning.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. Now turning to the other side, the Trump administration's war on higher education continues. Last week, a judge had temporarily blocked their move to revoke Harvard University's ability to enroll international students. So this week, the Trump administration found a way around it. Secretary of State Marco Rubio halted all new interviews at U.S. diplomatic and consular posts for international students seeking those visas. It's the talent that we could potentially be losing out on, the innovation that comes our way. Carl, Hong Kong is already stepping up and asking its universities to welcome international students affected by the Trump administration's approach. What could this mean for our competitiveness in the mid and long term if we lose out on all of this talent?
No, you're exactly right. And they're starting to pivot, and rightly so. I mean, but more importantly for the U.S., I mean, you don't protect America's future by locking out the very people who could help build it. This is something that we've seen for years. This is not just the Chinese. I mean, we've had immigrants from other countries come to the United States because of the environment that we offer and thrive. Secretary Rubio, I think, is right to call out China's influencing campaigns, right? The espionage through academic channels is not new. We've seen this before, and we've seen stolen patents. There's a reason we're scrutinizing Chinese nationals in critical fields. That's not unknown, but let's not confuse targeted caution with blanket suspicion. And in 2024, over, I think it's 275,000 Chinese students were enrolled in U.S. higher education. Nearly 20% of all international students were Chinese. And a poll, I think there was a 2023 Pew study, found that about 60% of Chinese STEM graduates stay in the U.S. after graduation, which contributes directly to American research, innovation, and economic growth. So there's a positive side to this that we seem to be missing, and sort of this rash reaction that you're seeing from Secretary Rubio. They're coming in with the machete when they should be coming in with the scalpel, from Silicon Valley startups to medical labs to AI companies. They're founding businesses, publishing research. They're advancing in lots of fields that we need in order to win, the 21st century. And I think their presence subsidizes American universities and drives global academic rankings.
That's such a good point. They pay so much more than students who are from the United States. It's a huge, for the universities, there's a huge economic element to the international students.
Totally.
And to modernize your comparison there a bit, they're using an axe when they should be using a precision laser to treat the situation. But the security piece is also really important. What you pointed out, that there are legitimate concerns that need to be evaluated. That's reasonable. Look, every few years there's a discussion about student visas, even citing 9/11. And, according to the 9/11 Commission report, just one of those hijackers was on a student visa. The others were on other types of visas. And so, but they all took different courses at flight schools in the United States, or at least the ones that were piloting. And so the naivete of simply dismissing that there are any security issues, I think, is also problematic. I think we have to sort of look at and say, and this is, again, where compromise works in a democracy. Okay, there are legitimate security and national security and competitiveness issues that we need to address. Let's look at those, and let's look at those constructively. And I think this is the beauty of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where you spent a dozen years, Carl, is that used to be the body where you could have pretty strong bipartisan consensus on working through those issues. Dick Lugar working closely with Hillary Clinton, and that has been a staple of American democracy that I think has worked really in our benefit, that I worry is also being lost right now. But we should be able to acknowledge those threats and recognize that not all efforts to rein them in are problematic. It's just that when you overstep and you overreach, you actually limit our ability to track those potential threats.
Yeah, and the other issue is the fact that it can't be viewed that every Chinese in the United States is suspicious, is a spy. We, and this because of your experience, maybe our vetting needs to be better. Maybe we need to do a different kind of vetting to check for relationships that are, that would be unorthodox, that would lead to some sort of real suspicion. I think during the Cold War, the exchanges that we did with folks behind the Iron Curtain yielded positive results for us, opened their eyes to democracy, opened their eyes to a system of checks and balances, rule of law, the relationship with the market. And that really exposed people to things that they didn't have in their countries. I think that with China, there's something similar, but I do think that the environment today is different than the one that we had in the 80s. You have social media, you have a whole bunch of different sort of variables that change things now. And you do have to put all these things sort of in this environment or in this vetting. But I do think that the vetting is the sort of aspect of this that needs to be updated. We win too much. We risk losing too much from just taking a blanket approach to this topic. I don't know, Luis, if you think that there's things in the vetting side that Homeland Security could be doing differently to address this issue?
Well, one of the proposals, or what the Trump administration appears to be moving towards, is looking more closely at people's social media. I think particularly with international students. Again, I think it has to be done within reason. And I think when you overstep, you actually make it harder to look at things like that. But if somebody is espousing anti-American views regularly and is affiliated with an organization that seeks to do harm to the United States, and it was there all along on social media, imagine if something happens and everyone's like, how the hell did you guys not look at this? How did you miss this? How did you miss this? Which, look, again, going back to 9/11, how is it that local police had certain concerns? The FBI was looking at other things. The CIA was looking at pieces, and nobody connected the dots. That's essentially what DHS was created to do, was to be a hub of keeping that information moving so that you could, not miss those types of things. So I think it's legitimate to suggest that we need to step up our understanding of who's coming and what their intentions are. But the idea, the way that the Trump administration is presenting it, I think ultimately in the end makes that harder. But should we be on the lookout for potential people? Look, citizenship and visa processes for decades have included questions about whether or not you belonged to the Communist Party, or one of the citizenship questions and something that gets asked in these background processes is if someone ever belonged to an organization that was trying to overthrow a government. Right. Those are things that we should be asking and that we should understand in these processes. So it's not entirely unreasonable. I think, again, it's just this administration's approach of taking an axe instead of a precision laser to the issue is what ends up becoming problematic. And the fact that they're trying to make a determination of what views people have beyond what would be a national security issue, because there are legitimate security issues in terms of belonging to an organization that would do harm to America. And then there are just differences of opinion at a point in time. That I think is the problem, where if you overstep and you're trying to police how people think who present no threat, then I think we lose the essence of who we are.
No, I think you're completely right. But I would say we're full of these 80-20 issues. It's like, that Donald Trump identifies the right issue, but then deals with it the wrong way. And for most Americans, for most folks that are just struggling to put food on the table, excited to be able to go to vacation to the lake that's an hour away, have a little bit of extra money to do those things, they can't pay attention to all these things. They don't pay attention to all these things. They're paying attention to their lives. At the same time, parts of who we are as a country and what makes us special gets eroded, because someone needs to be watching this and someone needs to be doing something about it. I'm just concerned that the conversations that you and I are having, and Jeremy, who's not here, unfortunately, are not conversations that other folks are having because their lives are really busy and they don't have time for this sort of thing. Yeah. But then they're going to see the effect of it, Luis. They're going to see less research. They're going to see less, ability of the United States to be leading in these different areas because of the environment that we have now, which is stomping innovation out. And I think that it's putting us in a pretty negative place because we're focused on one aspect of the many that make up this conversation.
Well, Donald Trump promised a golden age, but he's really moving us to the dark ages when these attacks on research is important. Scientific independence is important. And if you move the United States into a sort of theology of Trumpism that denies truth and that blocks research from actually taking place and that removes investments in research and innovation and in just independent thought, you end up in a really dark place. I think it's not a golden age, it's a dark age. And I hope people take note of that and realize it, because it's those innovations that have helped us deliver life-saving medicine like the COVID vaccine that, Trump himself had touted for a while as his Project Lightspeed. If you completely gut these organizations, we're not going to be able to do that kind of thing in a future pandemic. If you don't invest in the technology to stay ahead on AI, China and other countries are going to eat our lunch, and rightly so, because we will have completely given them the space to do that. And so hopefully people start to look at that and show a little bit of alarm, because the reason that we're the envy of the world, whether it's on medical research or AI or innovation, is because we have allowed those spaces to thrive here, but also because our form of democracy and capitalism make us very competitive. And again, that's where we have to defend the institutions and the systems that we've had, far from perfect, in need of tremendous improvement, but they've allowed that kind of thing to foster growth and ideas and collaboration in a way that no one else in the world has done. And so I really worry about what it means if we let that go.
Yeah, it's that exceptionalism that seems to be on the wane. But I would say, if Rubio wants to defend America, and I think that's where it comes from, but he shouldn't do it by giving our future to someone else. And in this situation, it seems that the way they're approaching it is making it easier for, you mentioned Hong Kong. Well, you can mention Australia. You can mention other areas where this research and this talent is going to go in this circumstance.
Yeah, and it's not going to be here, and nope. That is not a golden era. But yeah, unbelievable.
Yep.
Turning to a lighter topic, this year Hollywood could enjoy a $4 billion summer. Vulture senior reporter Chris Lee penned a great look at what we can expect. Spoiler alert: lots of sequels or reboots. 2 years ago, that $4 billion haul was reached largely on the backs of the Barbenheimer phenomenon. But this year, the biggest driver seems to be just that there's a lot of highly anticipated movies. Carl, what are you looking forward to seeing in a theater?
Well, I'm excited because I think Hollywood remembered its job, and it's not to scold us, but to entertain us, Luis. I'm fired up for Mission Impossible. I think that's going to be great. I want to see The Accountant too. I think Ben Affleck plays it really well. It's a complex character. Going back to some of the themes that we were talking about before, he reminds viewers that masculinity can be layered. He's a flawed character, but he's fascinating. I think movies are a way to process history, right? Tragedy, complicated ideas, but great movies also introduce hard topics. And I think, that is part of this, but we also want to be entertained. And Hollywood also wants to put butts in seats, so to speak. There's a couple of other ones I'm looking at. I like science fiction a lot. There's a lot there. So I'm excited.
Nice. I have seen the commercials for the new Superman, and some of it gives me pause. It looks a little bit silly, but I think that the casting looks fun. I think Rachel Brosnahan is fantastic, and I love that so far, at least in the preview, she looks like a really formidable character, very different from the Lois Lane that we saw in the Superman of the late 70s, early 80s. Yeah.
I don't think anybody watches that one anymore, Luis. It's just us.
But I'm excited to see Rachel Brosnahan, the marvelous Mrs. Meisler.
Yeah.
She's just such a great actress, and I love seeing her interaction there on screen. But I don't know that I'm super excited about that one. I have to go see the Jurassic Park reboot because I've just been watching it since the original in the theaters, and why not? So that should be fun. I'm not saying it'll be a good movie, but it'll be fun to watch. But the Mission Impossible, also one that really speaks to me. I've loved that entire series. I think particularly the third one and the sixth one were phenomenal. And so this should be a fun ending. But also a reminder that Tom Cruise has been such a key piece of Hollywood's success and recovering from COVID and bringing people back to the theaters. So I think part of what excites me about going to a movie that he's a part of is that I know that he's gonna take every effort to make sure that you actually enjoy that outing.
That's the
whether or
last
not,
one too. Yeah.
yeah, the last one. I mean, I'm impressed that he's still doing it because he's not a young guy anymore, and it's been kind of fun to see how his character has evolved into a more sort of reluctant hero in the last couple of outings. So yes, I should enjoy that one, but yeah, it should be a fun summer at least, and that gives us something to also remember and find shared experiences, so that whatever's happening in Washington, we can't lose sight of that, but we can certainly go out and enjoy a little bit of life and get back to things with a little bit of a different perspective. I think Hollywood should lecture us from time to time, and that's okay. And we're not always going to agree, but the fun stuff that's coming this summer, I think will be good too.
No, I agree with you on that point. I just think that a lot of folks want to be entertained. I do think that, and you hear this, there's a lot of escapism involved in going to movies, right? And I think that, folks are interested in that aspect of it. I don't want to sound like I don't appreciate the movies that are historical or documentaries that really push the limit, right? And bringing attention to things that folks have forgotten or were unaware of historically, right? I think that's very important. But I also think that people want to see, pushing the limits on technology to show new ways of showing images, right? New narratives, I think, are really important. I think, for instance, we didn't mention this, Wes Anderson's The Phoenician Scheme. It's a little weird. It's super creative.
It's Wes Anderson. It's going to be weird.
That's right.
I love Wes. Yeah, they're pretty fantastic. What's also exciting is that it's, as much as I'm looking forward to going to an actual movie theater this summer, the TV has gotten just so much better. I just think there's so many phenomenal shows that, kudos to Netflix for really kicking off. HBO really before them, but Netflix has also, I think, delivered on a lot of strong shows. HBO continues to deliver a lot of fascinating, what would be considered cinema if it actually made it to a theater. But shows that really can get into the characters in a way that a 90-minute or 2-hour movie is not able to do over an extended, even if it's a short season of 8 episodes, is really fascinating too. So it's great to have all of that. I do worry that the tariffs that Trump is proposing on anything filmed outside of the United States could impact some of that. Yeah. But a lot of fun stuff also on the small screen at home.
What are you watching on Netflix? What's your thing?
My daughter and I just started watching the Daredevil reboot, the Daredevil Reborn, I believe it's called. Okay. And that's been fun. That's one of those. I think it's the better side of Marvel. That started actually with a bunch of Netflix reboots. If you watch the original Daredevil movie with Ben Affleck, I'm a Ben Affleck fan, but it was a terrible movie. Whereas the show that had initially, I think it was Netflix that had produced it, was really terrific. And now there's a reboot now 10 years later that so far is pretty fun.
I'm working through The Last of Us.
I still haven't checked into that one.
We're big fans here at my home. That's been really good. It has a little bit to do with sort of an apocalyptic sort of scenario where the world.
I think that's why I've stayed away from it so far.
But I think that's one that I think we've been pretty much glued to. But I think you're right. The options now on Netflix, on Hulu, on Paramount, it's really great. And it's you can pick. It's a buffet. Which I think, we didn't have this as kids. You don't even need to have TV anymore. You can just have these different, services.
Yeah, and what was interesting on a lot of these shows too is what you talked about earlier in the political context, that we have to stop looking for people as ideal or create them into some sort of perfect meme that we can all get behind, because people are flawed in a bunch of different ways, and that's okay. And even in Daredevil, I think the the main character, probably all of the characters, are so complicated, and they're not purely good characters. I mean, you're rooting for the hero of the show, but man, there's a lot wrong there, and that's the reality of what people are, right? We're complex characters. We have good and bad, and it's the mix of that and sort of the choices that you make that make a difference. And so hopefully as we disconnect and get into the entertainment side, it also reminds us that people are complicated, and we that doesn't mean that we give up on them.
I agree with you a lot, and the point of this purity that I think is being craved by some folks, they need to get over that quick, because look who's in the White House. He didn't win on purity.
Yep.
He won because he spoke to certain views and certain needs that the American public felt wasn't being delivered. He hasn't delivered them, but he did promise to deliver them. And his character wasn't an issue when it came to the election. We can make parallels with the different characters that we like watching in these movies. Pedro Pascal in The Last of Us is not a very how would you say, great figure all around. He has different levels of complexity and contradiction, which I think, going to your point, Luis, we should embrace. We shouldn't push these things apart. It reflects who we are as people, but at the end of the day, we need to know the why, and we also need to know where they want to take us as leaders, right? I'm focusing more on that point. Because the impurities sometimes strengthen them as candidates,
and Carl,
better.
We kind of sound like MSNBC here. We're like straining to agree with each other, but so if you'll allow me, I'll indulge me in this one personal context. You and I did not get along when we first met. I was working for Barack Obama. You were working for Dick Lugar. Somebody introduced us, and it had to be one of the most awkward, tense, and just fiercely antagonistic exchanges that probably either one of us has ever had. I remember the person who introduced us was like, "I'm really sorry, I don't know what happened." And yet, as the years went on and we got to know each other, we realized that there's a lot of common ground, even if we disagree on some of the fundamentals, and particularly on political tactics. I think at the time we were arguing about the political realities of different approaches, and yet we can find common ground, and that's also why we wanted to run this experiment together and with Jeremy, was to sort of bring different perspectives. When I met Jeremy, I think we talked about this. He used to be much more conservative. He was like kind of a 1980s young Republican type of kid. And we've all come a long way in our evolution, but you and I did not get along when we first met. And I think that speaks to the possibility if you're actually willing to sit down and talk to people.
I think you're right. I also think that we had a lot of, we were just being very arrogant young men, and we wanted to be right, and we wanted to sort of be the bull. But that made us alike in lots of ways. But it also, as we evolved, I think we had a lot of respect for each other, which I think is the issue here, that we might come from different places on issues, but if we can respect each other, we can understand where the other person's coming from, we can move together, which is what's wrong right now. People don't seem to understand each other. They don't respect each other. They don't take the time to do what you and I did. I think, we've been friends since the late 2000s, right? 2000, I don't know. I think it was 2009, 10, around there. Was it?
Yeah.
I think it was. And then the relationship has flourished into a really strong one. So I think that says a lot, but also for the American public, you can disagree with each other, but try to understand where they're coming from and give yourself the time for that relationship to evolve.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, I think we're in the middle of NBA playoffs. I know that your team, the Knicks, are having a tough go at it.
We're not doing well.
But even if they don't make this, if I still think anything's possible because of Jalen Brunson primarily. But even if they don't make it, man, people are going to have tremendous respect for Jalen Brunson and the rest of that team. Karl Anthony Towns, the team is just so tough, and you got to respect them even if they don't win. And that's kind of a good lesson for the rest of us. I hope to see those guys come back and even stronger next year because it's just such a fun team to watch. But you got to respect them, even if you disagree with them, even if you're rooting for a different team.
That's a really nice way of ending the show, Luis. I really appreciate your empathy. Keep hope alive. That's right.
And you worked for an Indiana senator, so I imagine this is a tough one for you.
Yeah, but New York always loses against Indiana. Reggie Miller, I mean, it goes back to the 90s. It was horrible. They always lose against Indiana. And here they are in the same situation. Maybe they can turn it around.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Centered. Subscribe and stay tuned